gift of snow. The lawyer's cardboard box sat on Margaret's kitchen table, its packing tape still intact. Through the thin walls of her kitchen, the January wind whistled a hollow melody. She pulled her grandmother's old shawl tighter around her shoulders and reached for the scissors. Inside, nestled in crackling tissue paper, lay a snow globe no larger than her palm. The base was dark wood, weathered with age, carved with delicate spirals that might have been decorative flourishes, or might have been letters in a script she didn't recognize. The glass sphere was impossibly clear for its age, free of the yellowing that plagued her childhood collection. Margaret lifted it closer to the wan morning light, filtering through her kitchen window. Inside, a perfect New England town slumbered under a blanket of perpetual snow. Tiny clapboard houses lined streets that wound in familiar patterns, though she couldn't quite place why they seemed to tug at her memory. A miniature church spire rose above snow-laden pine trees. In one window of what appeared to be a general store, a tiny figure stood watching. The front door slammed. Tom's heavy footsteps crossed the living room. The realtor called again. He lingered in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his coat. "We need to make a decision about the house." Margaret set the globe down harder than she intended. "It's been 3 weeks. And the market's hot right now. Your grandmother's place would sell in days." "That's exactly why we should wait." The words came out sharp enough to slice. "Everyone's selling too fast. Not thinking." "Like you're not thinking." Tom's voice rose. "That place is falling apart. The taxes alone." Margaret's fingers closed around the snow globe. "It's not your decision." "It'll be my problem when the maintenance bills come due." She squeezed the globe, muscles tensing. Before she could stop herself, she shook it hard enough to send the artificial snow into a frenzy. Tom's footsteps retreated, followed by another slam of the front door. The tiny flakes swirled in agitation, far longer than they should have, as if responding to her own racing pulse. That night, Margaret woke to an impossible silence. The typical hum of distant traffic was muffled, transformed. White light filtered through her bedroom curtains, far brighter than the usual street lamps. The scene beyond her window stopped her breath. 3 feet of fresh snow blanketed everything in sight, virgin white and untouched. The neighboring houses poked through like islands in a pale sea. But beyond her street, perhaps a quarter-mile in every direction, the world was completely normal. Winter-brown lawns and bare streets formed a perfect circle around the snowfall, as if a giant hand had dropped a single cloud that emptied itself over her neighborhood. The snow globe sat on her nightstand, though she distinctly remembered leaving it in the kitchen. In the pre-dawn light, she could make out the same pattern of streets in miniature, the same arrangement of houses. The tiny figure in the general store window had moved, now pressed against the glass. As Margaret leaned closer, her blood turned to ice. The figure's face was impossibly detailed, her grandmother's features rendered in perfect microscopic scale, wearing the same knowing expression she'd had in her last days. "Be gentle with my collection." The words echoed in Margaret's mind as she reached for the globe. The glass was warm beneath her trembling fingers. Inside, the swirling flakes were no longer white. They drifted down in lazy spirals of deepening crimson, coating the tiny town in a thickening blanket of red. Echo Run. Randy's been driving this stretch of Route 23 long enough to know its ghost stories by heart. Every small town has them, tales of wandering spirits and mysterious lights, amplified by isolation and long winter nights. But he's never given them much thought until tonight, when he sees the stranded Ford Fairlane for the 3rd time. The first pass, it's a young woman in a green wool coat waving him down. The second, 20 minutes later, it's an old man in a heavy winter jacket from the 80s. Now, on his 3rd pass, a teenage boy in a leather jacket stamps his feet against the cold, arm raised in that universal signal of distress. Each time, different people. Same car, same spot, same desperation in their eyes. His plow's radio hasn't worked right for hours, cycling through fragments of voices. County dispatch. Anyone out there? Please. Each transmission carries the distinct crackle of different decades' equipment, like shuffling through years of emergency calls all at once. The snow falls heavier now, thick enough to swallow his headlights. Through the swirling white, he catches glimpses of other vehicles scattered along the roadside. A '72 Chevrolet, a rusted VW Bug, a modern Honda, each with their own figure standing beside them. Some wave. Others simply stare as he passes. All of them fade like old photographs when he looks too long. Randy grabs his thermos, needing the coffee's warmth, but finds it frozen solid. The cab's heater is blasting, but he can see his breath. Outside, the stranded figures have begun to move, leaving their vehicles behind. They walk in odd, synchronous patterns through the falling snow, forming concentric circles that spiral toward his plow. The radio bursts to life. "Can anyone hear me? My name is Helen Brooks. February 13th, 1963. Static. Then another voice. "Jack Wheeler, December 89, I'm stuck out here." More voices layer over each other, a chorus of the stranded and frozen spanning decades. Randy's hands tighten on the wheel as he realizes the figures are no longer just on the road. They're in his rearview mirror now, filling the path he's already plowed. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Every person who's ever been stranded here, all walking in that same hypnotic spiral. Through the whiteout, a new set of headlights appears ahead. Another plow, identical to his, scraping steadily toward him. As it draws closer, Randy sees the driver's face, illuminated by the dashboard glow. His own face, frosted with ice, mouth open in a silent warning. The radio voices merge into a single whispered chorus. "Your turn to wave." Randy's plow sputters and dies, here on the highest point of Route 23, where the wind howls like a living thing and the snow erases everything. He reaches for his phone. Dead. The emergency kit in his passenger seat feels suddenly inadequate against the weight of all these accumulated years, all these echoes of the stranded and the lost. Outside his window, the first figure appears again, the woman in the green coat. Helen. She presses her hand against the glass, leaving no mark in the frost. Her mouth moves, but he hears her words through the radio's static. "Welcome to the echo." Randy steps out of his useless plow into knee-deep snow. The cold hits him like a physical blow. He raises his arm, waving toward the distant curve, where he knows another version of himself will round the bend in 20 minutes, or 20 years, or 20 decades. The snow falls endlessly, and somewhere in the dark, an empty plow drives on, guided by no one, clearing the road for the next echo in an infinite loop of winter nights and desperately waving hands. The Pedestrian. Marcus hates the late shift in the Skyway security office, especially during polar vortex weeks, when the wind chill drops low enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, and the emptiness of downtown Minneapolis feels absolute. The monitors show endless streams of nothing, vacant corridors connecting vacant buildings, the occasional cleaning crew moving like ghosts through the fluorescent-lit arteries suspended above the streets. Tonight it's 35 degrees with the wind. The windows of his security station rattle with each gust. On Monitor 6, a lone figure hurries through the Skyway between Wells Fargo and US Bank, collar turned up against imagined wind. The timestamp reads 11:42 p.m. Movement on Monitor 3 catches his eye. Something's wrong with the perspective. The camera shows the Skyway's exterior, and there's a dark shape moving past the windows. Not inside, outside. Marcus leans closer. The shape resolves into a person walking casually through the air, exactly level with the Skyway, as if strolling down an invisible sidewalk. Their long coat doesn't billow in the brutal wind. Their hair doesn't move. They turn their head toward the camera and smile. The figure on monitor 6 stops suddenly, breath fogging the skyway window as they stare out into the night. Their shoulders tense. They spin around, but the corridor behind them is empty. When Marcus looks back at monitor 3, the outside figure is gone. The person in the skyway is gone too. His phone chirps. A text from Annie, his supervisor. Check camera log for James Wong, Wells Fargo analyst. Wife reported him missing. Last seen in skyway system around 11:40 p.m. Marcus's fingers feel numb as he types. Cameras show him in Wells USB connection at 11:42. Lost visual after. 3 dots appear as Annie types. Then, 4th one this month. All during deep freeze nights. All last seen in skyways. Check the exterior cams. Look for the walker. You know about it? We all do. Been happening for years. They never find the bodies until the first thaw. Always the same. Frozen solid, smiling, no signs of hypothermia. Like they've been flash frozen. A notification flashes. Motion alert, camera 12. Marcus switches feeds. The exterior camera shows another figure walking through the night air, parallel to the skyway between IDS and Ameriprise. Inside, a janitor pushes his cart, unaware. The walking figure turns toward the camera. In the infrared light, their face is a perfect black void. Their smile, though, gleams white as fresh snow. Marcus reaches for his radio, but his hand freezes halfway. Through his station window, he sees something moving in the darkness outside. At his level, 30 stories up. It's walking toward his window, smiling. Behind him, the monitors switch to static, one by one, like lights going out across the city. The temperature in the security station begins to drop. The beach. The tourist shops along Panama City Beach still have their Christmas lights up when the impossible snow begins to fall. It's been 6 years since the Panhandle last saw snow. That January morning in 2018, when kids rushed out to make tiny snowmen that melted by noon. But this is different. Megan watches it from her lifeguard station, noticing how the flakes catch the neon glow from Pineapple Willie's sign. They look almost crystalline, like salt. She recognizes the Carmichael sisters the moment they step onto the beach, their matching pink hoodies bright against the darkening sky. The older one, Ashley, has been a fixture at sunset all week, phone perpetually raised to capture content for her followers. Tonight, her camera is trained on the snow, while her younger sister Emma spins with outstretched arms beneath the impossible flurries. From her elevated position, Megan watches Ashley scoop up a handful of snow. The girl goes suddenly still, phone dropping to her side. The snow isn't melting against her skin. Instead, it's growing, spreading like frost across a window, but in fractal patterns that remind Megan of coral polyps. In the stark phone light, Emma's skin has taken on an impossible sheen, like sunlight scattered across shallow water. She's pawing at her arms now, not brushing the snow away, but almost caressing the crystalline patterns that spread across her skin. Her movements have become fluid, unnaturally graceful, as if her joints have forgotten their proper limitations. Megan's radio crackles with Pete's voice from the pier. The snow around the pilings is growing like barnacles, he says, transforming the familiar wood into something alien and marine. But Megan can't look away from the sisters. Ashley's neck bends at an impossible angle as she watches the snow fall, her own skin now rippling with shadowy movements beneath its surface. Emma's laugh drifts across the beach, but it's wrong. Musical in a way human laughter shouldn't be, like water chiming against glass. She's moving toward the surf now, her shadow in the neon-lit snow, no longer matching her body's movements. Ashley follows, their forms rippling, fingers stretching into something webbed and translucent. When Emma turns back toward the beach, Megan's breath catches. The girl's smile is too wide, lined with structures that could be teeth or tiny gleaming shells. Both sisters wade deeper, their movements now synchronized as if choreographed by the waves themselves. Megan's phone buzzes with a weather alert. The snow isn't showing up on radar, but the Gulf's red tide levels are off the charts, matching samples from the deepest ocean trenches where light hasn't touched in millions of years. Her hand moves toward her radio, but stops when a single flake lands on her wrist. In the garish light of the strip, she watches it spread into a beautiful pattern, like a blooming sea anemone. The Gulf has grown tired of waiting, she realizes. After millions of years, it's finally reaching out to reclaim the land, using this taste of winter to disguise its advance. The Carmichael sisters were just the first. She watches their forms slip beneath the waves, their shadows merging with something vast and dark waiting below. They won't be returning to their hotel room tonight. Their belongings will be found tomorrow, neatly packed, with only a few crystalline scales on their pillows, suggesting anything amiss. Her wrist tingles where the snow touched her. The crystalline patterns are spreading now, beautiful and terrible, and she understands why the sisters didn't try to brush them away. Part of her wants to follow them into the Gulf's dark embrace. But for now, she forces herself to stay, to watch. Someone needs to observe as the snow continues to fall, as more visitors step onto the beach, as the Gulf patiently gathers its children home. The winter ward. The first snowfall of winter always brought the drawings. This year, Claire found Mrs. Novak hunched over the activity room table at 3 a.m., her arthritic fingers working the crayon in precise, unnatural movements. A cold dread, a feeling she knew too well from her grandmother's last days, slithered down her spine. On the paper, a crude sketch showed a building with rows of identical windows. In each window, a small figure waved. Down the hall, Mr. Peterson, who hadn't held a pen steady in months, was drawing the same image. Same windows, same small figures, same building. By morning, all 8 residents of the geriatric ward's dementia unit had produced identical drawings. Their usual artwork, Mrs. Rodriguez's formless watercolors, Mr. Peterson's shaky trees, still clung to the walls. But next to those, the new drawings pulsed with a disquieting energy. Claire felt a tremor of unease. They weren't just different, they felt wrong, purposeful. In the break room, beneath outdated training manuals and a faded calendar permanently open to February, Claire found old incident reports. Every winter, during the first snow, the dementia patients drew. Different nurses, different patients, same drawings, the building, the windows, the waving figures. A faded newspaper clipping, tucked within the reports, detailed a fire at the old mill, a textile factory, converted to apartments. The headline read, "Millview Blaze, a close call." The snow continued into her next shift. The patients gathered in the common room, a circle facing the windows. Their reflections in the dark glass seemed to lag, moving a half-second behind. A faint smell, like burnt sugar, hung in the air. "Do you smell smoke, dearie?" Mrs. Novak asked, her voice clearer than it had been in months. The others answered in unison, a chilling chorus. "Not yet." The activity room was a blizzard of paper. Drawings of the building, closer now, details emerging. Brick walls, small, deep-set windows, a sign half visible, Millview Apartments. The old textile mill on Harper Street, the one Claire's grandmother used to say was filled with the whispers of lost children. Mr. Peterson started screaming at midnight, a sound that ripped through the quiet ward. Claire found him pressing his hands against the window, his breath fogging the glass. "They're so warm," he whispered, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Can't you feel how warm they are? The children miss their home." The other patients pressed their hands to the glass, a ring around the ward. Where their palms touched the cold surface, Claire swore she saw handprints appear on the other side, smaller prints, pressing back, almost glowing with heat. More reports in the break room, a litany of winter woes. 3 years ago, the drawings, then a burst pipe in the Mill apartments. 5 years ago, the same drawings, then an electrical fire, quickly contained. 7, 9, 12 years back, the pattern stretched, each winter's drawings followed by close calls at the old mill. Each incident worse than the last, practice runs for something bigger. One report mentioned a nurse, Sarah, who'd tried to transfer the patients during the first snow. She quit the following spring, they said, never the same. The snow fell thicker. Her patients didn't sleep. They drew, the images evolving. Dark windows, figures no longer waving. When? Claire asked Mrs. Novak during the evening medication round, her hand trembling as she held out the pills. The old woman didn't look up from her drawing, her crayon moving in sharp, mechanical strokes. February 2nd, she said, a date circled in red on the old calendar. During the storm, the big one, the one that finally gets it right. Claire checked the long-term forecast on her phone. A record-breaking blizzard was predicted for February 2nd. That night, she found them in the common room, their circle tighter now, backs too straight, heads tilted at identical angles, hands folded in perfect symmetry. They spoke in turns, voices overlapping. We see it every winter, getting closer. The children are so patient, almost right this time. They've waited so long. To come home. Their words spiraled, a chorus of fragmenting minds in perfect synchronization. Behind them, in the darkness beyond the windows, a flurry of movement. Countless small handprints appeared in the falling snow, pressing, melting the glass from the outside, reaching inward with a heat that felt like a forgotten summer. A faint cry, like children calling, rode the wind. Mrs. Novak turned to her, eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights. They're ready now, she said, her voice a perfect blend of 8 voices. We're all ready. Will you help us open the window? The faint smell of smoke was stronger now, and Claire knew, with a sickening certainty, that this time the fire wouldn't be contained. This time the children were coming home.